Thank you very much, Executive Vice President Ivailo, dear friends. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be able to be here and also bring greetings to you from the elected representatives of Europe, from the European Parliament and from the Committee on Employment and Social Affairs. And of course, we are here today to celebrate Eurofound's 50th anniversary, but all of the other agency directors are also here. And we also have the director from EGE here. So I really wanted to start with emphasizing the importance of the work that all of you do in your respective agencies for us and the work that we do in the committee. And we very much appreciate your readiness to provide us with facts and figures and analysis every time we ask, sometimes also in quite a tight schedule. And if I refer back to the nautical comparison that Professor Susskind did about policymakers sitting in a boat in an open sea, research very seldom tells us one right answer to complex problems, right? But research tells us about the different policy options that we as policymakers have in front of us, the consequences and the differences between different policy options. So in a way, I would say that you provide the compass that we need to navigate on this ocean. And I also want to thank you for the inspiration that this event yesterday and today also has provided, because one of the key topics of this foundation was the future of the European social model, right? And I will start with that. I also have a written speech, so no need for Roxana to feel bad. But I really want to start by emphasizing that if there is something that I think we need at this moment in time, it is a positive vision. Because the starting point, I think, when we talk about the European social model is that we need to believe in the European social model and not accept a thinking where, we think that we have to turn into China or we have to turn into the US to make it in the global competition, but really also to believe in our own strength when we talk about Europe. And all of the speakers that have been speaking during this event have all referred to the very complex global times that we are living in. We see the growth of authoritarianism. We see how the rules-based multilateral order is being challenged and attacked. We are seeing how the global rules for trade and commerce are being rewritten. And we also, of course, in Europe know that still there's millions of Europeans and workers who are really struggling with the cost of living and really struggling with making ends meet. And all of these developments, of course, also affect workers and affect working life. I had the honor also a few weeks ago to be chairing the Parliament delegation to the UN World Social Summit. A visit that was extremely interesting, but also a bit depressing. Because I think the message we got there was that although there's been a lot of progress when we talk about social development, if we look decades back in time, of course, a lot of good things has happened. What we were told also is that we are clearly now witnessing stalled progress and also backsliding when we look at just recent history and the moment that we are in now. So it also, I think, shows that all of these global developments also have negative consequences when we talk about workers, when we talk about working life, and when we talk about social rights. We are also not immune to this development in Europe. We are also in some European countries seeing backsliding. We are seeing social rights being challenged. We are also seeing social dialogue being challenged. So therefore, I think it's important to stop and reflect on this moment, because I do really think it is a crucial moment in time and history, and also the time when we should be focusing on what the core of the European project, the core of the European social model then really should be about. Because my personal impression is also that sometimes within the EU, we kind of forget the big promises that it has and the big potential. And then when we look outside of the EU, we're actually seeing people taking to the streets in Ukraine, in Georgia, in Moldova, to defend the European project and what the values that it stands for. So for me, the European project has never been about, just competition or just defense or just digital capabilities or energy. These have always been elements of it, of course. But really the core of it, I think, is about rule of law, about democracy, human rights, but also about trust and about people. It's about equality. It is about quality jobs and safe working conditions, and it is based on an idea of a social model that, for example, promotes collective bargaining for improving productivity and reducing societal inequalities. And as a part of our progressive response to all of these worrying developments around the world, I think we must emphasize that the social model, this core, of course, must continue to be the heart of the European project. It has given us a competitive advantage by ensuring quality of life, social mobility, economic equality, and these are also areas where we perform well against our global competitors, but at the same time, these elements are often overlooked when we talk about competitiveness. And remembering that this is not just a project for Europe, and I was very happy to hear also our Executive Vice President referring to this as a global task, also a global task for Europe. Because the world is also screaming for voices, emphasizing the importance of the social agenda, of social rights, democracy, rule of law, and international law, human rights, in a global context. And I think Europe has a huge role to play and a huge potential to be a strong global actor, talking about the same values that we work for within the European Union. I also have a tendency to remind my colleagues, also when we talk about policy making, about the fact that we must remember there's also a strong popular support and popular demand for a strong social Europe and a strong social agenda. And what I usually refer to is a Eurobarometer that was published just after the European elections, where they asked citizens in the European Union, why did you vote in the last European election? And looking at the reasons, the average for all of the EU, the number one reason was the cost of living. And I think that actually sends a very important message to decision makers within the European Union during this mandate, because if there is a disconnect between what people expect from policymakers, the reasons for why they engage in parliamentary democracy, and a disconnect between what the parliamentary democracy then delivers for them, that kind of disconnect can create mistrust in the whole political system, also mistrust that feeds in to the support of parties or movements that are anti-systemic, so not respecting the rules and the fundamental values of our common projects. And I think this is also important to remember when we talk about the competitiveness agenda. And I know that I'm preaching to the already convinced, I guess, in this room. But I still think it is important to emphasize that our social model is not a problem or a regulatory burden. It's our competitive advantage. And looking to these reports that have been published, we talk about the Letter report or the Draghi report, this is very clear. Also in these reports. Draghi, for example, emphasizes this point. He warns European decision makers for not repeating the mistakes of the US when it comes to the social model. He emphasizes that competitiveness cannot be understood as wage cuts, but really should be seen as relying on skills and technological development, as we have heard also from the professor here today. And I think in addition to this, when we talk about the competitiveness agenda, I do also think that we need more talk about what educational and social investment then could mean at this point in time. Coming from a country in the Nordics, I think we have a tendency also to, when we talk about the welfare state, you know, we want to have all these examples of social innovation that we have done. But usually when we do the list, we have to go very far back in time. I was talking about the introduction of free school meals in Finland in the 40s here yesterday. And that's a bit of a depressing picture, right? Because we would also need current day examples, knowledge sharing, best practices on what works when we talk about social investment, when we talk about employment policy and educational policy. And also in this work, we of course need research. So it's not enough to talk about that we need to increase investment, but we also need to invest in the right way. My home country, Finland, when we had the best results in terms of learning outcomes in our educational system, we were never the biggest spender. So of course you have to have a sufficient level of investment, but you also need to know where to put the money, so to say, what kind of social or educational policies that you need to enact at the same time as you invest. So, what else do we in the committee expect from the future when talking about the social agenda and social Europe? We are, of course, awaiting the Commission's Quality Jobs Roadmap, which was already mentioned, will be published in the beginning of next month, followed by the Quality Jobs Act next year. We're also waiting for the mobility package, hopefully with a suggestion to strengthen the European Labour Authority, introduction of ESPAS, initiative to improve skills recognition and portability within the European Union. And as we see it in the committee, we have no time to waste now when it comes to the social agenda, as we also last week got a very important confirmation of the EU's competence and possibilities to act when it comes to enhancing working conditions, living wages and quality jobs. And I'm, of course, referring to the landmark decision by the European Court of Justice regarding the Minimum Wage Directive adopted in 2022, since the court upheld the directive almost in its entirety. And this sends a very clear and important message, firstly, to the European workers. I think they have the right, they have the opportunities to continue to demand and work for living wages, to strengthen fundamental rights of workers, collective bargaining and social dialogue. And this is also a European issue. For member states, it sends an important issue and message on there has to be no more waiting. So we wish for all the member states to follow in the footsteps of Ireland and also do the national action plans when it comes to social dialogue and transpose the Minimum Wage Directive. And for policymakers in Europe, the message is also very clear. Yes, we can use binding legislation to secure adequate minimum wages and to enhance collective bargaining. So, once again, despite the minor weakening, the core of this directive remains unchanged, and all of the parts regarding collective bargaining also remained unchanged. Although this directive has only been in force for quite a short while, it has already reduced wage differences within the EU and also increased the lowest wages, especially in many Eastern European countries. And more importantly, even I would say, is the target of at least 80% collective agreement coverage, because this has also already initiated processes in a lot of member states to achieve this goal, and also to analyze what type of structural changes different countries would need to be able to enhance social dialogue and collective bargaining. And I think this is one of the politically most important parts of this directive, because it has also created a positive discourse around social dialogue and collective bargaining. It has set a benchmark, and it has also given us a tool to be pushing for social dialogue and collective bargaining in other legislative processes and initiatives. One of these will be the reform of the Public Procurement Directive, which is also anticipated for next year. This is also an important priority for our committee. Why? Because this directive involves major public funding, more than 2 trillion euros every year when we talk about public procurement. And that is why it's also a very important place actually to push for quality jobs and fair working conditions. We want to make sure that companies that submit abnormally low bids, violate working conditions or safety legislation, or undermine trade unions could be excluded from procurement processes more clearly than now, because we have seen too many situations in member states where procurers have tried to do this, but then lost later in court. So we think that this is a place for the EU to put an end to deterioration of wages and working conditions by making public contracts conditional upon collective agreements and respect for workers' rights. And this is also important from a gender equality point of view, since when we talk about public procurement, we also often talk about services that are procured in sectors that are predominantly female worker-dominated. The other very concrete issue I want to touch upon before I finish is, of course, the question of AI and algorithmic management in working life that we've heard a lot about here. I think all of the European Union member states are faced with the same issues. Everybody knows the potential that new technology brings with it, but also recognizes that there are risks. And we want to maximize the good and minimize the bad. It's really that simple, I would say. And since this is an example of an issue that is affecting all member states, we just got data to the committee that approximately 40% already of workers in the EU are working in places where you have at least one algorithmic management tools in place. In the US, the numbers are way higher, and it's clear that we are not going in an opposite direction from the US in this regard, but the development is towards increasing these types of management tools and this type of technology. So we do think that one set of joint rules to protect workers' rights is a better option than 27 different solutions. And the first step in this process was the Platform Work Directive from last mandate, setting, I think, an important benchmark on data protection, data gathering when it comes to workers and working life. And what we are calling for now in the committee, after a vote of 41 in favor and 6 votes against, which is a very strong mandate, is to have a general directive on AI in the labor markets, using the rules already included in the Platform Work Directive. AI in the workplace is also a good example of good cooperation between Eurofund and the EMPL committee. Eurofund has contributed to the quality of parliamentary debate in several manners by being invited in our hearings, providing insightful expertise, information notes with case studies, brief analysis of legislation, also to the rapporteur and the shadow rapporteurs working on this INL. And I know that Eurofund also contributed to the Parliamentary Research Service study, providing your data and on the basis of the results of the European Working Conditions Survey. And all of this has been very useful and I think also very influential actually when looking at the final vote outcome regarding this file. So friends, to end, in complex, insecure and challenging times, we need to focus on what is most important, and that is the people, not only of this continent, but also of the people more globally. Reducing poverty, supporting affordable housing, delivering quality jobs in every sector and every region, enforcing social dialogue and collective bargaining is about creating a society that... Thank you. I was just coming to the crescendo, so it was it was good support. But it's about creating a society that not only respects every member, but also really strives to invest and acknowledge the human capital of each and every member of society. So I will end with a quote from Finland. We usually say that when you're a small country and a small people, you cannot afford to lose a single member of your society. And I think that the same rule goes for Europe at this crucial time. We cannot afford to lose a single member of the European society, and to ensure that, we really need to invest, take care, and develop the European social model. Thank you very much.